Hello, everyone. Hope you're all well. And if you're here in the UK, just remember keep hydrated. It's really hot out there. I went out actually to water some plants, and you really do feel it. For people saying it's no big deal, this isn't normal. This isn't normal for the UK. I mean, people are saying the summer of '76 was like this. Maybe it was, but I mean, I didn't experience that directly, but I think there's something going on. I think that we can't deny that this is not normal to have 30 degrees plus in a UK summer. Anyway, that aside, I want to talk about one of the most, I suppose, glaring clashes in the culture wars of recent years, and that is this sort of ongoing clash, for want of a better term, between feminists and the trans lobby. Now, I don't want to oversimplify things because there's nothing simple about this. But broadly speaking, that is what we've seen. Now, a few disclaimers. Of course, there will be outliers. Of course, you will get feminists who are very pro-trans, and you'll get trans people who are, not engaging in this sort of activism either. It's one thing we need to remember: not every trans person is an activist. Um, And I think sometimes like a minority of a minority can sometimes call the shots. But I think it is irrefutable that there is this obvious clash going on between the two sides. Um, and it's worth a bit of commentary or reflection. Um, Yesterday I saw a report about the trans athlete, MMA fighter Fallon Fox. I have to say I was disgusted by it. This person, MMA fighter, was boasting about um, cracking the skull of one of, for the context of this one was set for one of his opponents. Um, and I was disgusted by it. Anyway, the BBC apologised for doing an interview with this person on the grounds that people said it was condoning violence against women. Now, I suppose you could argue that MMA fighters in general are in a violent sport. So, women MMA fighters are being violent to each other. There is an argument on that. But um, there is a reason why Anthony Joshua or Tyson Fury are not fighting um, the world women's heavyweight champion. I'm not sure who she is at the moment. I don't follow it closely, but there is a reason why we're not seeing that. Because Tyson Fury or Anthony Joshua would most likely kill her. That's not a sexist statement. It's just a reflection of biology. Um, and in competitive sports, namely martial arts, I mean, consider this: you have the weight divisions, right? So, for the same reason that you wouldn't have a male lightweight boxer, fighting a male cruiserweight or heavyweight boxer, it's the same principle. You wouldn't have a woman fighting a man because it's recognized that the average man is stronger than the average woman. Now, some people will get into the whole thing of, well, she could kick your ass. That's missing the point. It's totally missing the point. Um, a well-trained fighter, male or female, could probably hurt an average person, but a well-trained man will almost certainly beat a well-trained woman every time, assuming that he isn't going easy on her. It's not sexism, it's reality. That's just, you cannot bring emotions or sentiments into basic physics. You just can't. Um, that's the reality. But anyway, I noticed that there were groups like Pink News effectively defending this person and saying it was the latest example of transphobia because the BBC apologised for doing the interview. Maybe the BBC shouldn't have done the interview in the first place. I don't know. I believe in free speech, but this person, Fallon Fox, boasting of violence against women, it's utterly disgusting. And my question is, if they think they're so tough, why don't they compete as a man, which he biologically is? If he's so tough, why don't you fight a man? I mean, a real man. biological man. It's just this. I can't even get my head around the sort of thinking there, whereby I'm a biological man, and for whatever reason, gender dysphoria or whatever it is, I self-identify as a woman. I want to be a tough woman in a violent sport so that I can beat up other women. There's something about that I just can't get my head around. People could say what they want about that, but this idea, well, it's a violent sport anyway. They all beat each other up. It's a little bit deflective, um, because the implications of that are, I think, quite troubling. Um, But on the wider issue, this has been going on for a few years now. I know Douglas Murray addresses some of this in his book, The Madness of Crowds, which I still haven't read. I want to get into that quite soon. There's a whole chapter on women and a whole chapter on trans. There's definitely crossover here. Um, and a big part of it, a very big part of it, comes down to what is a woman? Now, that should be a straightforward question. A woman is an adult human female. I have no problem saying that. Keir Starmer can't. He can't answer a straightforward question. And the left seem to have a real problem simply defining what a woman is. And that's insane. Um, Now, my track record, I'm no big fan of third wave feminism. I have often criticized it. I've criticized its double standards, I've criticized its misandry, and I've criticized the polarizing attitude some feminists take, where they have this catch-all. I really hate terms like mansplaining and nonsense like this. And I don't like generalizations of anyone. So I don't unsay anything I've said about third wave feminism. But when it comes to this issue, I do think that they have legitimate contentions. I do think that they are right to be frustrated that the very definition of womanhood is simply being erased. I mean, when we get a situation where hospitals, the NHS, is basically saying chest feeding people, um, replacing femininity, replacing feminine pronouns to basically pander to a minority group. Um, there aren't chest feeding people, there are breastfeeding mothers. Okay, that's not bigotry, it's just reality. A biological man cannot breastfeed. Maybe a man can develop breast cancer, a man can do that, but he cannot breastfeed. He just can't. Um, and I just think there's an enormous amount of dishonesty around this, and it's skirting around language to suit sensitivities. It's pathetic, um, and we're seeing it a lot. So I understand feminists being frustrated by that, and I do think that the trans lobby can be very obnoxious. I think they hide behind minority status. And groups like Stonewall and Pink News, they're very quick to sort of play up the victimhood narrative. Now, what I mean by this is they sort of take this attitude, well, trans people are a minority, therefore they cannot be questioned because if you do, you're being transphobic. That's well, it gets into a wider issue about what do we mean by equality. Now, surely, if people are treated equally, then they're equally, you know, uh, liable to be criticized. Like I can be criticized, or anyone else could be criticized. Surely that should be true equality. But there is a reason why the trans issue stands out from LGB, lesbian, gay, bisexual. I mean, lesbian and gay people, fought for generations to get basic rights. And I do think it was disgraceful the way, particularly gay men, more so I would say than lesbian women, the way gay men were treated, having to live in the shadows, the Alan Turing experience, of course, is famous, but there's other examples. That was disgraceful, and it's good that this country has moved on from that. But I do think that there is an aspect of not just the trans issue, but the wider LGBTQ plus um, lobby, for want of a better term, that has become very militant and intolerant. Whereby this is the way it is, and you either agree with us or else you're a bigot. It's really tiresome because I think it is a threat to freedom of expression. Why is it a threat to freedom of expression? Because not just because they're throwing around words, but because there is threats of legislation. Now that's the danger. That is the danger. One thing that Kimmy Badenoch has come out with, which I think is really refreshing and really good, is that she has said the police need to be focusing on real crimes, not policing feelings on the internet. And I totally agree with that. I think there is far too much police resources wasted on hurt feelings, frankly. I think where there is specific bullying of an individual online, that's unpleasant. I never condone bullying. But I think that should be the domain of social media companies to deal with. And I would look at that as a targeted vitriolic attacks on an individual rather than just a few rude words here and there. Um, because free speech is one of the most sacred things we have in a free society, and it has to be defended. Has to be defended. And I think there are people who, frankly, will use their minority status as a way to try and take away the freedom of expression of others. I.e., I don't like what you're saying about this issue, so basically, I'm going to say that you're victimizing me, and I'm going to ensure that you're get a knock on the door for a hate crime. I think we really, really need to be careful about how this legislation is used. Um, and I would certainly roll back some of it. This doesn't mean that hate crime is a trivial issue. It doesn't mean that if someone is being abused or facing intimidation, that's awful. Nobody, trans people, women, nobody should be facing that. But the hypocrisy of the trans lobby, they shout about transphobia, but they have no problem vilifying women. This disparaging term, trans exclusionary radical feminists, that is basically women who argue that biology matters. It's a bit misleading because they're not actually that radical. What they're saying is actually what most people would agree with, that biology matters. So they're painting out someone like J.K. Rowling to be this extremist, this zealot. The irony is, J.K. Rowling has always been quite centre left. Hell, she's even borderline woke. Um, J.K. Rowling's hardly a right wing reactionary. She is, however, a feminist, and she has spoken out on this consistently. But I have never ever seen J.K. Rowling advocate violence against trans people or advocate hate against trans people. She has had to be more vocal because she has been relentlessly attacked. That's what's happening. So when women are defending themselves from trans bullies, they're being labeled transphobic. It really is a perverse situation. Um, I would say though to those feminists, a lot of people actually agree with you, but you're not helping matters if you're saying, "Oh well, I'm getting mansplaining here." The issue here is with trans militants. It isn't with men in general. You'll find most men actually agree with you on this issue. So for goodness sake, don't polarize them by then assuming it's all men. This is the nonsense that you get in a lot of movements, um, whereby people polarize potential supporters by crude generalizations. It's one thing that irritates me. Some on the right will be relishing this. They will be saying, well, this is left on left, feminists versus trans people. And they'll think, oh, it's wonderful. Let's get out the popcorn. I think that's misguided because there are actually wider implications. Although women are primarily targeted by trans activists, we're all potentially, men as well, are potentially going to be on the wrong end of legislation. For example, there was a retired police officer in Hull. This was a few years ago. It was quite a high profile case. And he was investigated for using the wrong pronouns. And I think, I don't remember all the details, but I think it was an unfair dismissal case. Anyway, he ended up winning it. So we are seeing a situation. I've often criticized the courts, but to be fair, they do sometimes get it right on this, where they recognize it's a waste of time and they throw such cases out. Um, what we're seeing from the likes of Pink News and the trans lobby is that supposedly the current group of conservative candidates are all a bunch of transphobic bigots. But I haven't seen a single one of those candidates say anything derogatory actually about trans people or incite violence or anything of the sort. They have defended the definition of biology, and they have said we need to have a pushback against this sort of weaponizing of terms. And yeah, there has been internal disputes. For example, Penny Mordaunt stood up in the comments and said trans men are men, trans women are women, and she's been criticised for that. The reason she's been criticised is not because the other candidates hate trans people, it's because this is an issue around freedom of expression. Um, for instance, that recent case with forget the woman's name, but she won an unfair dismissal case. Miss Forstater, I think she was called. But what this really comes down to is a question of tolerance. Now, the trans lobby are always talking about how life is unbearable and w- we're living in a really intolerant society and so on. And they will point to such factors as the very high suicide rate for trans people. Well, that's tragic and it needs to be taken seriously. But is there a high suicide rate because people are saying biology matters? Or is there a high suicide rate maybe because of I'm not a psychologist, but maybe there is psychological things going on there. Maybe, for example, is it that young people are being fast tracked gender reassignment and having their lives ruined rather than getting perhaps therapy that could address the problem of gender dysphoria? Because there has been cases where young people, there was a young woman, and that's what she was. She was biological female. She suffered gender dysphoria, and she was immediately fast tracked for gender reassignment. Well, she had her breast cut off. She can no longer conceive. She can no longer do the things that most biological women can do. And she's only 19 years old. Her life's been ruined because she was fast tracked into this because she had gender dysphoria. Um, there's also cases of young men who felt that they were women and they've it's a similar thing. They can never procreate. So we're seeing a situation where I feel that there's this need to pro just fast forward it. I mean, there's a group called Binary which I follow online, and they make a lot of interesting points. I had a cartoon, and some might say, "Well, that's trivializing it," but it was hard to argue against this. It showed a mother speaking to her son, and the little boy would say, "Can I play with matches? No. Can I do this? No. Can I do that? No." In other words, the mother was just being a normal parent, telling him what he shouldn't do. Then he said, "Can I cut my genitals off?" "Yes, absolutely. You're so brave, and I support you completely." There's a serious point to that, which is that there is this pandering, I think, to trans ideology, which really can be quite unhealthy, especially when children are concerned. I think the very idea of a trans child, well, firstly, it's an oxymoron because you can't legally get gender reassignment until you're 18 in this country. The very idea of, you know, telling a confused 5-year-old that boy that well, you're really a girl. I mean, it's dangerous actually. Um, And I just think there's a lot of things around this that over time we could see, really, I don't know. I don't know where it's going to go. I do insist that biology matters. It matters in areas like competitive sports. It matters in area of prison allocation. Um, it matters in a lot of areas. It matters in terms of free speech. I do not think you should legislate someone's conscience. So if someone is dead naming or using the wrong pronoun, would I do it? Probably not, because if I know it hurts a person, I'm not going to deliberately seek to hurt them. But should that be legislated against? I don't think so. I don't think so. Um, I just think that this whole clash between feminists and the trans lobby, on this one, I'm with the feminists. I don't want to say anything I've said, and I would just respectfully say to them, it is a fact that for years you've been collectively shaming men. Uh, and so a lot of men would actually be sympathetic to this, but don't polarize those men by acting like militant trans activists account for all men, because they don't. Let me know your thoughts on this. It's obviously a controversial issue, but I've never shied away from controversial issues, and frankly, I find it refreshing that these Tory candidates are standing up for biology because it matters. I think it is absurd that a woman has to apologize for saying that she believes the definition of womanhood matters. So, particularly the female candidates, Badenoch, Truss, Mordaunt, um, Braverman, although she's out now. This idea that they're transphobic hate mongers just because they're saying that the idea of womanhood matters. Of course, it matters. Of course, there should be um, gender specific areas. I mean, this idea, for example, that men should be freely allowed to go into women changing areas is clearly absurd. So I really think that this clash, it's going to be interesting to see how it pans out. Let me know your thoughts.